Basu Godin Notebook. 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 Basu Godin. Hey, Arpin, we had our previous notebook only 2 days ago, but here we are. We're back on Monday night after free agent frenzy, but not so frenzy for the Montreal Canadiens.
No, pretty quiet, pretty expected too. And I think after Ken Hughes spoke, we all knew why it was like that. Uh, you and I talked about it several occasions that the Canadiens we're not gonna give in to the demands of what the opening day of free agency call for, which is either big term or big money or both. There were some players who signed on short-term deals, but not ones, when you go into free agency with a criteria that I want a top six forward on a 2 or 3 year contract, like those two things, it's like jumbo shrimp, like they're oxymorons. You can't really generally sign top six forward on such a short-term deal on the opening day of free agency. So the Canadiens wind up with Alex Barré-Boulet, but more importantly, they wind up with an 8-year extension for Jujraj Slafkovsky at $7.6 million a year. Announced mere minutes before Ken Hughes addressed the media to talk about his day. So save that press conference at the very least, but also accomplished a pretty important piece of business and what I feel was the number one priority for the Canadiens going into this offseason, just to get Slavkovsky signed at a number that came in the same range, and in this case under what Nick Suzuki makes and what Cole Caulfield makes. And so now they've bought 4 of Slavkovsky's UFA years at a $7.6 million number with a cap that's heading towards the $100 million mark before the end of this contract in all likelihood, almost guaranteed actually. It's going to look pretty team-friendly if Slafkovsky keeps taking this trajectory, which obviously this is a bet that he will.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so before we dive deeper into what the Canadiens did not do, but more specifically the Slavkovsky signing, let's just mention to everybody who's listening to us or watching us on YouTube that this is our last episode of the season. So we're going to take a break for the summer. So stay tuned. All those of you who follow us on Twitter, whether you follow Arpin, myself, or the show at Basu and Godin, in the relevant time, we're going to give you the specifics on when exactly we're going to be back at the helm with another year of the Basu and Godin Notebook. All right. Now, that being said, next, Juraj Slafkovsky, you mentioned the fact that he signed at a number that's below Suzuki, below Caulfield. I think that was a tremendous business done by the Montreal Canadiens. I thought that there was a certain incentive on the side of Slafkovsky to wait and maybe try to further enhance his value by playing this third year. But for the Canadiens, it's literally a home run, even though some people might say, okay, the sample is rather small. It's let's say 4 months of great hockey, but the development curve has been such that they bet on that, and it's a former first overall pick. They have to trust the fact that this development curve is a sign of things to come. So on the side of the Montreal Canadiens, it's probably a very calculated risk. But I find that the fact that they were able to convince Slafkovsky to sign now instead of next year was really, really significant, and it's going to pay dividends for the whole salary envelope of the Montreal Canadiens.
Yeah. Ken Hughes mentioned how Cole Caulfield played out the entirety of his contract, and that's when he signed. He got the number that was just under Nick Suzuki's. Kent mentioned that was a difference in this negotiation in the sense that for Slafkovsky, you have that option. You could play out your contract, and then we can sign you next summer, and then maybe the parameters will be different. Sample size will be different. you'll have proven yourself more, and you might put yourself in a better position to make more. But for now, under these circumstances, with the small sample that you just mentioned, this is what we're comfortable with, but we're willing to go to 8 years. He mentioned that they talked about 6 years, 7 years. They talked about all sorts of different combinations. Getting this number at 8 years, I mentioned it earlier, that's 4 years of UFA, which they've also got with Suzuki, and they've also got with Caulfield. Although that might be a little less with Cole because of just the weird way he entered the league. But in any case, getting 4 years of Slafkovsky UFA, buying 4 years of UFA for $7.6 million a year, by heavily front loading the deal. I mean, Slafkovsky's getting a big chunk of that money within the next calendar year, basically.
Yeah.
But that is the period in which this contract is, in all likelihood, going to look really good. When the final 4 years of this deal, the money will have largely been paid out. The cap hit's there. He's playing his UFA years, because don't forget, it's UFA is either age 27 or 7 years in the league. And since Slaf played at 18, he could have been UFA at age 25. So this is really a big development for the Canadians that you push that back to 29. You're getting all of his prime years. His best years are going to be during this contract, and you're getting it at a very reasonable number that's only going to get more reasonable as time goes on. Now, the only unknown here is if Slavkovsky is going to actually hold up his end of the bargain. I don't have many doubts that he will. I don't think the Canadians do, but because of the nature of the contract and the number that's involved, he doesn't have to be a superstar. At $7.6 million, you could be a top 6 forward, a good top 6 forward who scores goals, is good offensively, but not necessarily a superstar caliber player, and still earn that money. That number is a little high right now for the player I just described, but by the middle of that contract, that's probably going to be the going rate for a player like that.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing also, because you mentioned the signing bonus, obviously that was disclosed by the soon to be shut down Cap Friendly. One thing that it has not meant. No,
I think Renault put that out. Renault Lavoie put that out. Cap Friendly got it from him. Yeah.
Oh, okay, because it's also on Cap Friendly. What doesn't seem to be there is any form of no trade clause. So I don't know if it's meant to be updated eventually, but Nick Suzuki has a modified no trade clause in the last 4 years of his deal, and Caulfield in the last 3 years of his deal. So if Slavkovsky doesn't have any sort of protection of that sort, it's an even better deal for the Canadians.
Yeah, but I would wait and see on that. I'm not sure if I'm not sure if that's complete or incomplete yet, but it would be. But frankly, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, with what we've seen from this player, I don't think it would be that relevant. I think that I don't think the Canadians would have any interest in trading a player making $7.6 million in 2030, who's in the prime of his career. It's probably playing at around 220 pounds at that point. Would have 7 years of experience in the NHL, 8 even. And you're not looking to.
The day that you're signing a 21-year-old kid to an 8-year deal, you're not thinking about trading him. All I'm saying is that any protection or leverage that's not given to the player can become useful for the team down the road, because who knows what can happen.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. But I'd be surprised. I'd be surprised if there was none. Frankly, honestly, it's pretty standard. As soon as you're eligible for UFA, you usually get some sort of trade protection. So let's wait and see on that.
So the fact that all those 3 guys are signed, you mentioned, the cap going up, and before in a blink of an eye, it will be at $100 million. Salary cap, in 3-4 years time, it's going to could be as much as $92 million, after next season. The fact that the Montreal Canadiens have their whole first line, each of these guys are signed below $8 million. It's pretty exciting when you think of the financial flexibility that this team will have when they truly decide to go shopping. Obviously, the time has not come. Today was not the day to do it. But I mean, they took care of their most significant players. Obviously, if Doc manages to stay healthy and delivers on the promises of what we've seen so far from him, he'll be given a hefty contract down the line. I mean, one day Ivan Demidov will have a big contract, but for now, this is your top line, and these guys, none of them will be making $8 million a year. I like the direction that it's going. Just purely in terms of finances.
All three of them combined make less than Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner.
Yeah.
So that's, and
one of the two is considered to be a problem.
It's not a shot. Yeah, it's not a shot at the Leafs. It's just as an example. You can use any other two, but they really got the whole line in at a number that's less than two superstar players. Is my point. And so it's and you're getting three players, like three. I think it's, you can legitimately call them potential star players. I don't know if any of them will become superstars necessarily, but you have three upper echelon players. The line was, by most metrics, one of the best lines in the NHL that played a significant amount of time together last season. I think I checked it out. There was something like 14th in expected goal percentage among lines that played 400 minutes or more last season. And that was their first year together. That was Slavkovsky, half of Slavkovsky's season, or just less than half of it, was a complete throwaway. Like, I mean, he didn't, the first 2.5 months, I guess, of his season last year was just a nightmare. There's just a lot of room for growth here, and Suzuki, what he showed us last season, like if he can keep that going and take even another little step, like these numbers that attached to these names are looking really low, and could look really low as soon as next season. And Caulfield's even coming off a down year, by his own standards for himself. Let's see if he can pick that up next season. But it's incredible because the Slavkovsky contract in particular, like I look at it and I say, wow, like usually you look at it and you're like, the last half of the deal or the last few years of that deal are going to look really good, or, and in terms of a lot of UFA guys, it's like the last half is going to look really bad. In Slav's case, at 7.6, I think within 2 years, like 2 more seasons of experience, and that contract could have basically a 7-year shelf life where it's just one of the best value contracts in the NHL. I really think it has the potential to be that. And that's a
little bit like Jack Hughes in New Jersey. He signed, and not long after, it was already a bargain.
Exactly. Or like Pacioretty in a Montreal context in a previous life. So to be able to sign a contract that I can comfortably sit here and say I think will be one of the best value deals in the league, shows, I think, the extent to which Juraj Slafkovsky wants to win with this team. I think he would have been well within his rights to tell his agent, that's too low. I'll bet on myself. I'll go into next season. The cap's going up. I deserve more than that. And he would have been within his rights. And I think even Ken Hughes would have understood that. And he didn't do that. And
it's a sign of a healthy culture. Huh?
It's a sign of a healthy culture, and it's a sign of an athlete who enjoyed his time in Montreal so far, and wants to win here. These contracts are going to help the Canadiens win down the road. When it's time, and we're going to talk about what Kent said about their forays into free agency in a bit, but he mentioned that he has no doubt that when it's time for us to go seriously into the free agent market, and by seriously, he means basically with a willingness to overpay, whether that's term, whether that's money, whether that's both, like a lot of people did today. I don't think Barry Trotz woke up this morning and said, let's take it chill. Like it's like he woke up this morning and said, I'm going to go set the NHL on fire, and just started handing out money like it was burning a hole in his pocket. But that's what you have to do to succeed in free agency. And yes, Barry Trotz won the day, but the Canadiens aren't there yet. The Predators made the playoffs last year, kind of somewhat unexpectedly, but still, they did make the playoffs. And they play in a dog of a division, and to have any chance of competing in that division, you gotta it's an arms race, and they brought in some armaments. Like it's so the Canadians aren't there yet. But these three contracts, when they get to that point, are going to let them attack the free agent market with aggression, and that's valuable. That's a really important building block to where this team wants to get and to what they want to eventually do when they do hit that window, when these young guys mature to a point where they require just a couple of supplements to be considered a contender, like to take them from a playoff team to a contending playoff team. These contracts are going to help them do that 100%. I have no doubt. Now it's just a matter of seeing if they can get to that point. But if they do, these contracts will help a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And plus, I mean, there's a chance that they might sign Caden Gooley over the course of the summer. It's probably not going to be the sort of contract that hampers them or is a detriment to their ability to sign further players. I mean, it's going to be, I expect it to be another sort of team friendly contract because it just doesn't have the stats to really have the argument to say, okay, I'm going to act the hard line. It might be a complicated negotiations, but at the same time, he cannot pretend that he's a 70-point. He's not a 70-point defenseman, you know.
No, he doesn't. But what he does have, he doesn't have the counting stats. But what he does have is he has minutes against very difficult competition. Another thing he has going for him is that as analytics get more and more incorporated into contract negotiations because they're being used in arbitration cases, his quality of competition numbers. He has a lot of numbers in his usage, and that help his case. And so the one thing that really hurt his case is Alex Vlasic's contract in Chicago. Now, Alex Vlasic, I think everyone recognizes is not quite at the same level as Caden Gooley, but he's not that far. And him signing at 4.6 a year on a relatively long term kind of limits Gooley's argument, if he were to make it, to say that I'm worth, I don't know, $3 million more than this guy, to use the 7.6 number that Slaf just signed for, we'll see. It's that one's not as cut and dry. And I think Kent's answer today, when he was asked about the Gooley contract, him almost immediately pointing out that they can wait till next summer to do it.
Yeah.
I think gave an indication of how it's going in the early going. I mean, he didn't want to say he doesn't like talking about negotiations publicly, but I took that to mean first he said they weren't moving with the same pace as the Slavkovsky one. I think Slavkovsky was the priority. But when he said he has another year left on his contract, if we can't figure something out this summer, I'm sure we'll figure it out next summer. Didn't seem all that concerned about it, but that might be one that gets pushed to next summer. It's possible. I don't know.
Okay, so when you mentioned the fact that they could, at one point, they're going to go seriously into the market, they will do that hoping that the organic improvement of the team will have made the Montreal Canadiens a more appealing team to the free agents, obviously with the money that comes with it, but that the prospect of winning will be more serious at that point. What I find interesting is that today, I mean, we all know that the Canadiens want to be at least close to a playoff team next year. But looking at the teams that were around the Canadiens in the standings this past year, some of those teams having finished behind them, namely Chicago, namely San Jose, teams that were really bottom dwellers this year, have made significant investments in the last few days. Well, first, I mean, obviously through their high draft picks, but after that, through free agency, to really accelerate things, as if those two teams had said, okay, we've got our guy, we've got our future, thoroughbred. Now let's surround them properly and not waste time in trying to get some high picks for a number of years. The process of getting these two teams much better now is already underway. You look at a team like Columbus that's been very active. For better or for worse, Ottawa has been active. But anyway, my point is the following. And you can say Utah, too, who's been hugely active since the draft. So that leads me to think that, yeah, the Canadians want to get better. But when you look, and I don't mind, I applaud the fact that they stay disciplined, that they didn't go spending like crazy. But the reality of it is that when you choose to wait and let things develop organically, and the teams that are around you in the standings get better, I think that there's a chance that some of the teams that were behind you might end up in front of you, and that this incremental improvement that they're hoping for and the knocking at the door of the playoffs type of thing, it's gonna be made harder by the fact that other teams around them have made those investments to get better now. So I don't mind the fact that they did not sign anybody, but a day like today makes me think, you know what? It might be another year where they might finish pretty low in the standings.
No, I totally disagree with that. I mean, you look at Chicago and San Jose, for instance. The guys they signed, the Canes have those guys. They have those bloated contracts. Like, imagine the Canadians went into free agency today and said, "Hey, Brendan Gallagher, we're going to sign you for 3 years at $19.5 million." Or, "Hey, Josh Anderson, we're going to give you a 3-year contract at $16.5 million." Are those not the types of guys that they signed? I mean, Tyler Bertuzzi is a good player, but he's not going to turn Chicago into a contender. You know, I mean, it's Alec Martinez, like these guys that they signed, like Tyler Toffoli. Legitimately, that's a good ad for San Jose. You know, I don't really understand what Tyler Toffoli's thinking there, but it's a good ad for San Jose. But more or less, the Canadians have they have Christian Dvorak, they have Yoel Armia, they have NHL caliber, they have legit NHL players on their roster that are not going to be here when they're winning, but they have those guys. So, you know, I don't know about that. Like, I think those two teams in particular, Utah's in a bit of a different case. But those two teams in particular went out in free agency because they don't have those guys. They need guys like that. The Kings have them. They have Dvorak. They can fill out a lineup with NHL worthy players, whether their contracts are bloated or whatever. The fact is that they can play NHL. They're NHL players, you know, and they're pretty good NHL players, frankly. So they're not in the same position as San Jose or Chicago or some of the other kind of bad teams that we're looking at to add players, because they cleaned house completely. Chicago's roster last season and San Jose's
it
was embarrassing, and they just didn't want to go through that again. Now to say they're going to go from there to start pushing the Canadians down the standings based on what they did today, I don't see that at all personally. I mean, I don't think they've made that big of a jump. Yes, they added some players, but I mean, Tara Vainen's a good ad, I suppose, but Tara Vainen on an island is different than Tara Vainen within the context of the Carolina Hurricanes. Like, I just feel, you know, and maybe Tara Vainen will make a good pairing with Bedard, and maybe it'll make them marginally better. But I just feel like the Canadians already have guys like that. They didn't need to sign guys like that. Like, that's, you know, like if we just take the example
that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that they needed to sign guys like that. No, what I'm saying is that
the signings that they made will push the Canadians further down the lineup, is what I'm saying, that the Canadians have players like the players that they signed today. They already have them.
Okay, well, you're not hearing what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that, let's say, apart from Anaheim, who hasn't done a thing, there's a lot of teams that are lower in the basement, in the standings, but even those that have been same level as Montreal. A lot of those teams have made effort to get better today by signing players. Some of them to contracts that will look like shit in 3-4 years, maybe before that. All I'm saying is that in the short term, when you want to get better now because you've had enough and because your fans have been waiting, or that your rebuild is taking forever, and say, okay, it's time to do a splash. When you act to get better now, it might have an impact in the standings for the upcoming season. And if it has a positive impact on your standings in the upcoming season, it might come at the expense of a team who chose to not do anything. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, but
you may disagree. I don't mind.
Give me an example. Give me an example of a player that went to one of these teams that's going to make a huge difference to the Canadians in the standings. I'm having trouble thinking of one.
Yeah, I'm not saying that Chicago will pass Montreal in the standings. It will be ridiculous. Okay, all I'm saying is, for example, okay, let's say Utah all of a sudden added Sergachev, Jersey, Marino, and Cole in their back end. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So they gave themselves a blue line and a stability that will help them win games. I don't expect that it's a team that's going to get worse this season. So the jury's still out there for Ottawa. We'll see what they do. But the middling teams like that, they try to get out of this mushy middle or even the basement. But don't you get what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying. I just don't agree with what you're saying. I understand with what you're saying, but I didn't look at today and say that, all the teams that are around the Canadiens all got better. That was not my takeaway from today. So I know what you're saying. I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
But in certain cases, in San Jose and Chicago's case specifically, the players they signed, when I made my initial point, is the Canadiens already have those players. Utah, Ottawa, Detroit. Like look at all the teams around the Canadiens. I don't see them being wildly improved from yesterday. Like it's really not. I'm not. I understand your point. I just don't see it. Like I just don't see. I don't see that those teams really improved vastly. That even if so, let's talk about Jonathan Marchessault, right? Obviously, the Canadiens went after him today. Like even had they signed him to a 3-year deal, like I think it's really appropriate that today was the day that Carl Alzner's buyout came off the books. Okay. Jonathan Marchessault signed a 5-year deal with $5.5 million with the Nashville Predators. He'll be in his late 30s when that expires. And again, the Nashville Predators are in a different place than where the Canadiens are. And the Canadiens, to their credit, would not go above 3 years on Jonathan Marchessault, likely offering him probably a far more significant AAV than the 5.5 he got, which is, obviously state tax-free in Tennessee. But they would not go the 4th year. It was a non-starter for that reason. For the reason that, and when you look at their ledger, like the two guys I mentioned, Gallagher's got 3 years left, Anderson has 3 years left. So why was 3 their stopping point? Maybe 2027 is the year that they want to be really serious on the free agent market, and that they were not willing to go past that year with Marchessault for that reason. But it's, even if they signed him for 3 years at, let's say, $8 million a year, would they be vastly better than they are right now? Yes, they'd be a better team, but I don't know if, like, this team's going to get better, and a lot of the teams I think that you mentioned are going to get better when their homegrown, native, young players are driving the bus and making them better. Absolutely. And that's when, so whatever those teams did in free agency today, to me, is somewhat cosmetic. It's done in an effort to make sure that the players that they have already are put in a better position to succeed, which you can argue maybe the Canadiens didn't do that, and maybe their young players will suffer as a result. That's possible. But, I mean, even if they'd signed Marchessault, I don't know if, in an ideal world, Marchessault would be their 4th best scorer this season. Yeah. Like, I think that's what they would hope, so...
Well, it's bringing a guy. The idea was to bring a guy that would give them a potent second line, and basically that would help make the team as a whole more competitive. It would not have been about the player himself. It would have been about helping the young guys to elevate their game, help them play meaningful games, maybe get closer to the playoff spot. But ultimately, you know what? 3 years, even 3 years, it would have surprised me had they been willing to go that far with him.
I'm just going by what Kent said today. Kent said we weren't willing to go 4 or 5 years. So I take that to mean that 3 years was their limit.
True.
So,
yeah.
I mean, personally, I agree. I would have done 2 years. And both you and I were in agreement that David Perron, who was signed by Ottawa, to your point, for 2 years at $4 million would have been a good ad for them. But again, it's not the end of the world that they didn't get him or that they didn't particularly go after him that aggressively, because frankly, it's hard to see a guy sign for 2 years and $4 million and say he preferred to sign in Ottawa when he had a similar offer from Montreal. So Montreal must not have come even close to that. So I don't know. Yeah. I think what Ken Hughes said today, where they would have liked to have done something, but it wasn't vital. It wasn't critical to what they were doing. It was more of a reward. And the one thing I do feel that Canadiens management feels worried, not worried, it's a bit too strong of a word, but it's on their radar. that, this team, this core group went through a season where they knew management wanted them to lose, right? Not this past one, but the one before.
The one before, yeah.
Yeah. I think, maybe they felt if they added someone, and they might still sign someone in free agency, but adding someone on day one, a significant top six forward, would have just cemented the message that we're out of that phase, and that we're trying to move up the standings, even though Kent Hughes, Jeff Gordon have been very clear publicly, and I'm sure privately, saying we're done with that. We're willing to trade draft picks. We're willing to trade prospects to get better sooner. This was their first opportunity to show it. It didn't work out, but it's not the end of the world. And I think they went about it in a smart, prudent way and just avoided bad Alzner-like contracts that you wind up having to buy out.
like the LA Kings signing Joel Edmondson, for example, which might turn out to be the new Alzner deal.
Yeah, those deals seem to follow a certain guy.
My God, yeah, no, but again, I'm very happy that they did not make any bonehead move like that. I'd rather they do nothing than they do something bad, and I mean that's great. I think that the guys the guys in the room also have a standard that they've set for themselves, and there's a certain amount of pride in saying we can get better as a group, the guys that are already here, and we don't necessarily need guys from the outside to make us better, because they're not the best versions of themselves just yet. So let's wait and see. I still think that there's little additions that could be interesting later on in the summer. Maybe that if they determine that using both Mailloux and Reinbacher at the same time on the right side is a bit too much. Maybe that they're going to look for a veteran on the third pair. Maybe that they're going to look for some grit on the fourth line. Who knows? But they've got a lot of bodies already. That's the thing, And you were mentioning Anderson and Gallagher. I mean, I love those two guys, and we've talked to death about those two guys during the regular season. But man, when you got so much money dedicated to two guys who are outside your top six, that's a hindrance to your capacity to spend and be creative with the money you got.
Well, I mean, the one potential top six winger that's out there is Vlad Tarasenko, who did not sign today.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know to what extent he fits what the Canadiens are willing to do, and Ken Hughes honestly sounded like a guy who missed on that and is not going to look at another free agent to fill that role, because it's a very highly specific shopping list. Top six forward, 2 to 3 year term, willing to overpay on AAV, but needs to be a guy who's like a difference maker and plays in the top six role. Those are tough. That's tough to find. So I don't even know if Tarasenko fits that description anymore, right? I mean, he's a guy who can play in your top six. Had 55 points last season combined between the Senators and the Panthers. So not nothing, 23 goals. Obviously won the Stanley Cup with Florida. So that's the one guy that's out there that I see that could maybe fit that description, but I'd be surprised if the Canadiens went after him.
There was, for about 12 hours on Sunday, a rumor floating around that Montreal Canadiens might be interested in Patrick Kane.
Yeah.
And I thought, at first I thought, man, that's crazy. But you know what?
No.
There was something really, really interesting, because it's just the idea of having this American superstar coming to play Montreal. There's something that I could not come to terms with, but in terms of the sort of fit that you're describing, it would have been perfect. And reuniting him with Kirby Dach, that would have been great. That would have really
been greater. So I'll tell the story from the draft. So on day 2, after Cole Hudson got drafted, the Canadiens somewhat suddenly said, we're going to make Lane Hudson available. And the way the draft worked, I'm actually only explaining this for your benefit. I don't think that our listeners cared, but bear with me. So the way the draft was set up is that you had the draft floor, the media. There were no media risers behind the draft floor. We were off to the side of the floor, so you couldn't actually see the floor really all that well. And then all the media availabilities were on the 5th floor. So you had to take an elevator to get up there. So it wasn't exactly accessible, So
Right.
I kind of noticed them saying that. And so I got there, and I got there late. And so I got there just as the scrum was finishing. So I sat and I chatted with a bit. And at the end, we were just kind of talking about the Canadians build and how things are looking. And, this kid, the Demidov kid, and he talked to me about how, his friends, like months and months ago, his friends would send him clips of Demidov and be like, you guys should get this guy. This guy's amazing. And so then he started like watching clips of Demidov and watching Demidov more closely, and really got into it. And, and I was talking about free agency a little bit and the trade market and what's going to happen and all the defensemen and the training camp that's coming up, the wild training camp that's coming up with all the D. And then all of a sudden he just kind of like, we were talking like just ads, like how the teams could add. And he's like, yeah, if I could tell them one thing, I would tell them to go out and sign Patrick Kane. And I had this big smile on his face. Honestly, Patrick Kane was his hero. And like literally like, a couple hours later, I think it was Frank Saravalli who put out that the Canadians were interested in Kane, and I don't doubt it for a second because he fit exactly the profile they were looking for. That's exactly what they wanted. So I know at least one member of the Canadians that would have been ecstatic had that happened, but I would imagine Ken Hughes would have been thrilled too. And why would you not want to bring like that kind of championship pedigree into your room? Although I think there's other sides of Patrick Kane that maybe you want to keep out of your room, but still, it's seemed like a perfect fit. And obviously, Marchessault, a very similar profile, is the guy they kind of targeted on free agency day. So,
yeah, I don't think that there were too much on Perron. I don't know about Tarasenko. Perron, it didn't seem to be like much traction there. It's a short list. It's a very short list. I mean, you could argue that Jeff Skinner could have been an option, but hey, the guy finally managed.
I think he wants to play a playoff game pretty badly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he found the right spot for it. He signed with Edmonton, so that's good. So it's all good to me. As I wrote, I think that the best signing they could do today was the one they made with Slafkovsky.
Yeah, and keep in mind, like when you say you're not adding anyone. I mean, Kirby Dach's a pretty big ad. Played one game, so that's a pretty significant addition to your team. But when you take the fact that they couldn't make a significant trade at the draft, they couldn't sign the significant free agent they wanted to sign in free agency, it comes off as a miss. It comes off as a swing and a miss. And that's fair, probably what it is. But the Slaf contract, I think, overrides that. And when Ken Hughes was talking about, I think we're going to improve organically. Like I think there's something to that, and they have. We're starting to see the process of the Canadians kind of replacing what they inherited with what they've acquired in terms of prospects. Kovacevic gets traded to New Jersey for a 4th-round pick. God bless him. God love him. Wish him all the luck in the world in New Jersey, but he wasn't part of the plan going forward. Jesse Ylonen does not get a qualifying offer, signs in Tampa, 2-way deal, gets a big guarantee in the AHL, but still, this is part of the process of starting to expunge kind of the stuff that they inherited that they don't like anymore. Listen, they inherited a lot of stuff that they do like, Gouli, Caulfield, Suzuki. Like, there's a lot of good pieces that they got handed to them by the Bergevin regime.
Yeah.
But some of the other ones are starting to get weeded out and replaced with the players that this administration has drafted. And like this summer is only the first step in that. So that's a long process. And like really, it just seems like if the Canadians are hoping to take a step next season, like to get out of the constant losing top 5 draft pick area to losing a little less, maybe picking like 10 to 14, like kind of where Detroit is now.
Yeah.
Over the next few years. And then I think in 2027 is when they hope to be like 2026, 27 to me seems like a time when they want to be on the cusp of taking that big jump. And then once they have the Gallagher and Anderson contracts off the books, that's when you make your big hit in free agency, try to get over the hump and become a real contender. That's that's how it looks like to me, at least.
Yeah, there's something about 2027, but the way I see it is more they think that they're already be uber competitive, and it's more like I think that the big piece would probably come even before that. It's just
Yeah, well,
that
they keep talking about next summer, but I don't think you don't go from where they are now to Stanley Cup contender
no,
in
no,
one
but
summer.
no,
It's
but
like
you
it's
can have, but that big free agent acquisition helps you take a step further towards that. I think that because around 27, you really have, Suzuki still in his prime, still has some years. Caulfield too. I mean, there's the nucleus will be in his prime,
mhm.
and it's going to be, as you said earlier, the end of the Anderson and Gallagher contracts, or maybe that they'll find ways to move those contracts before that. Who knows? But I think it's more a time where it's going to be like the final edition more than okay,
Well, that's what I
if we
mean.
want to be good, it's the time to do our big splash. I think that if they go on the free agency and make a big splash, it might be before that.
Yeah,
But
yeah. I'm
I
saying
think we
that that's where
agree
they what Ken
on
Hughes,
the
when Ken Hughes says
timeline of them being competitive though.
yeah, well, what Ken Hughes says we didn't enter this offseason saying we just need one or two players we can go win the Stanley Cup.
Mm.
The offseason where they could do that, I think, would be in 2027. I don't disagree with you that next summer they're going to try and sign some free agents. I have no doubt. Like basically, it's not hard to see. Dvorak money gone, Armia money gone, maybe Evans money gone, Savard money gone. Let's go on the free agent market. Push forward 2 years, play hopefully for them 2 years of competitive hockey, playoff hockey, where you're in the playoffs, you're competing, you're gaining experience, you're maybe winning a round, maybe even two, who knows? But you're in the playoff mix, and then 2027 you have another significant chunk of money coming off, $12 million for Gallagher and Anderson. And then you can be like, that's the summer where you go, we're one or two players away from winning the Stanley Cup, and you hit another free agent then. That's my point.
And in between, there's also Carey's contract will be off the books, so that will be
Yeah, exactly.
that might give them a bit more flexibility too. So,
Mm-hmm.
all right. Also, in something entirely different, there's assistant coach Alex Burrows who decided to leave his job, and so his contract. Actually, every assistant coach except Stéphane Robida had their contracts done, on July 1st, so they had to be renewed. Letowski and Eric Raymond have some new contracts in their pocket, but that's the time that Alex Burrows.
I didn't know Robida had his contract. I thought Robida also had his contract expire.
No, he's got one more year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Burrows decides to spend more time with his family. Honestly, sometimes when I hear that, I say, "Oh, here we go." There's this cynic in me that says, "That's a nice way to put
quit.
lipstick on the pig." but in this case, I mean, let's take a moment to see that Alex Burrows has played professional hockey for 16 years, and the second he retired as a player.
Yeah,
he joined Joël Bouchard as an assistant coach, and he's been in coaching for the last 6 years. So it's been 23 years uninterrupted of being in professional hockey without taking a break. I can get it that at some point there's somebody at home who's asking him, "Who are you again?"
Yeah. Well, I can't mention that he lives an hour away from Montreal, so that's an hour there. An hour commute in the morning, an hour commute probably late at night on game days. Some nights he wouldn't even go home because they had to be up in the morning to either go on a road trip or had an early practice or whatever. So yeah, but I mean, I think, listen, we go to all the practices and stuff. Like it's Alex Burrows' role clearly got diminished when Martin St. Louis got hired. He technically ran the power play. I think to say he ran it is exaggerating. He was obviously involved in it.
Yeah,
But
well, it was
Martin St. Louis runs the power play. I mean, like let's be honest. So I think there was some duplication between what Martin St. Louis does and what Alex Burrows does. Trevor Letowski is clearly, in the nerve center of that coaching staff with Martin. And Stéphane Robida has a lot of autonomy working with the defensemen because it's something that Martin St. Louis doesn't know all that well. So even though he does get involved with the defensemen, it's not as if he just wipes his hands of them and says, Stéphane, take care of it. So I can see Alex kind of also like, I'm doing this. I'm doing all that for this, where I'm kind of the fourth wheel on the coaching staff, in a sense. So I don't know. I kind of feel that maybe if he felt more needed on the coaching staff, that maybe he wouldn't have come to this realization.
Well, it could be needed in Laval. I mean, they'll need a head coach in Laval.
Yeah. But we got an update on that too, so that's it's worth mentioning that there was a round of interviews done by, and this I found interesting. I'd like to hear your take if you found it interesting too. But at the
Eric
interviews,
Crawford?
Not Eric Crawford, Vincent Lecavalier. Vincent Lecavalier was in on the interview process in Vegas. John Sedgwick, obviously, he's the GM of the team. Eric Crawford doesn't shock me because they scout the AHL extensively, and I think maybe they probably know these coaches. Just from crossing paths with them or whatever. But Vincent Lecavalier being part of the interview process, I was like, okay, so that's a little more than what I thought his advisor role entailed. Like obviously he's heavily involved in the draft. He's at the draft every year. He does a lot of pro scouting for them and sort of consults when there's a trade and they need to check out a player. He'll do that. Now he's taking part in interviews for the AHL head coaching job, which to me seems further involved than I thought he was. So I think slowly but surely he's starting to get more and more responsibility in this front office, which I thought was an interesting kind of low key tidbit that came out of the coaching update for the AHL. But we'll see.
The AHL is a development league, right? That's true for everybody. Yeah. So I think that Vincent Lecavalier, before he starts running interviews at the NHL level or even, get actively involved, I think that just having that experience, being able to, assess guys, ask questions and share his impressions with other, baseball, hockey minds afterwards is an interesting exercise. It just, it gives them repetitions to say to use a Martyism.
Yeah. So anyhow, they're gonna sort of he didn't give a number. I've heard it floated about that there might be as many as 10 people that they spoke to. I can't confirm that personally, but it's casting a relatively wide net. Yeah. They're open to a first-time AHL head coach, like someone out of junior. That's not, Ken Hughes said that's not an issue, and the way he said yes made me feel like some of the candidates fit that description. Because he said it pretty matter-of-factly. It wasn't like...
there might be one at the development camp this week in Joël Perrault of the Rimouski Océanique.
That's right. Yeah. So they're going to knock that number down, do a second round of interviews that Ken Hughes and Jeff Corton will take part in as well. We'll see actually, we probably won't see, but maybe Vincent Lecavalier will be part of those as well. At some point, there should be a new head coach in Laval, but some developments, and it was interesting to hear that they won't necessarily replace Alex Burrows on Marty St. Louis' staff. That Ken Hughes wanted to talk to Marty St. Louis about it before making that decision, because really they have three guys behind the bench as it stands right now, with Trevor Letowski, Stéphane Robida, and Martin St. Louis. So if they don't replace him, it would just confirm my theory that Alex Burrows didn't feel all that needed.
Well, not just that, but that Martin St. Louis wants to be in charge as much as possible. To which extent do you?
He can have 6 coaches, and he would be in charge as much as possible. I think that's quite clear.
Yeah, but at some point you don't want. You can have too many guys.
You can. You can, and I agree that it it would be his first chance to hire an assistant, though. Like he's inherited all of these guys from Dominique Duchamp, and so this would be his first opportunity to hire someone that he knows he could work with. And so I would be curious to see if that would be an opportunity he would like, and if someone, maybe an Eric Perrin, who knows? I don't know, someone from his past hockey life who wants to get into coaching that he knows he's compatible with. This would be an opportunity for him to give that opportunity and get someone that he really knows and trusts. Like please don't take that to mean that he doesn't know and trust Burrows or Slafkovsky or Robida. I think they've all grown very close and they all trust each other ever since Martin came on board, but he doesn't have one of his guys on the staff, and this would be his first chance to do it. So let's see if he decides that would be a nice thing to add to the staff coming up here before the season. But anyhow, let's move on to the mailbag. This is going to be our last mailbag. So we got to check out some of your questions. So let's go to the mailbag right now. We do a mailbag every Monday,
Let's go to the mailbag. Let's go to the mailbag.
Mailbag.
They reach out and they write to us.
All right, so for the last time this season, our mailbag. So thanks again for your questions, everybody. Much appreciated. Without further ado, let's go to Jimmy in Laval, who was asking us. I was surprised that Shea Weber was inducted in the Hall of Fame when he is still on Utah's LTIR collecting a check. Can you please explain how he got inducted to the Hall of Fame when he did not announce his retirement? Do you want to take this one, Arpin? It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, this is the Chris Pronger rule, basically. So in order to be eligible for the Hall of Fame, you cannot have played in any significant professional hockey games for a span of 3 years. So that's what allowed Shea Weber to be eligible this year, because he has not played a game in 3 years. And that's what allows Carey Price to be eligible next year, because by then he will not have played a professional game in 3 years. It's what's preventing Jaromir Jagr from being eligible, because he continues to play professional games in the Czech Republic. So,
and obviously, guys that are
Czechia.
The guys that are on LTIR are not announcing their retirement, because if they do, they have to forfeit the money that they're owed through their contract. So they just stay quiet and collect their check on LTIR. So there are obviously a bunch of guys who do that. To my knowledge, in recent years, only Roberto Luongo chose to announce his retirement and forego his money. So
yeah. So that's easy enough. So that's that. That's why, Jimmy. This one comes from Mark Della Posta, who asks, why do highly touted Russian prospects always have KHL contracts signed past their 18th birthday? Why would guys like Michkov and Demidov sign contracts making it harder for them to come to North America? Why don't they just sign deals that expire at their draft year? That's a good question. The NHL draft is not exactly seen by Russian professional hockey organizations as being this thing that they need to work around. They would prefer, obviously, that these players remain in Russia a bit longer than their time being drafted. So oftentimes what happens is, these players are obviously on a track to playing in the KHL. So when they're very young, 16, 17, they get, I don't want to say roped in, but they get encouraged to sign these contracts that take them past their draft year. And most of the time, NHL teams are fine with that. I don't think the New Jersey Devils are complaining that Anton Salayev has to go play professional hockey in the KHL for a couple more years. It'll probably be good for his development. And frankly, the Canadians, if Demidov is playing in St. Petersburg in the KHL, they'd be thrilled to have him play one more year in the KHL and then come over and as a more developed product. The issue with Demidov is if he's not playing in the KHL, and then I think there is a little bit of a hope on the Canadian side that St. Petersburg will come to the realization, well, if we're not having him play for us, why would we just kind of waste this kid's time playing him in the AMHL again? So maybe they would just let him out of his contract. That's not a guarantee by any stretch of the imagination, but that's, I guess, the most optimistic hope the Canadians can have. But the reason for it is that when they're in a position of not much leverage, these teams kind of use their leverage to get extra years out of them. That's basically the reason, because otherwise, and it should be noted also that most Russian kids aren't going to get drafted and aren't going to come to the NHL, but that's why you see almost every time a Russian kid is drafted, he has at least 1, if not 2 or 3 years left on his contract in the KHL, because that's how KHL teams like it, and they hold all the power at that age. So that's the basic explanation for that.
All right. Thanks a lot. So we've got Devin Maxwell asking us, you continue to insist that the Canadians have to start unloading defensive prospects. My question is why? What would be the problem with having a starting 6 of Matheson, Gooley? Well, it was sent to us earlier this week because he named Kovacevic, Savard, Jacky, and Mailloux in the NHL. You could give Hudson, Reinbacher, and Engstrom a guaranteed full season of development in the AHL like they did with Mailloux. Then you would have Harris, Struble, and Barron between both leagues in a battle to prove themselves worthy of being on the team in the future. You can always trade Savard, Harris, Struble, or Barron if the right deal comes up, but I don't see any desperation at this point of the rebuild. I don't see that the Canadians have to trade defensemen right now. Well, Devin, it's funny you should say that, because today I asked a similar question to Kent Hughes, because after the Kovacevic trade, he was moved to New Jersey for a 4th-round pick in 2026. I mean, the common perception is that the Canadians have too many defensemen. But what if they thought that they only had 1 too many? And they assume, I think that in Kovacevic's case, he's a serviceable defenseman, plays on the right side, it doesn't make a lot of money, and he was totally expendable. So I think that they already saw the writing on the wall that he would be put on waivers and had a profile of a guy being claimed. So they moved him to get something in return for his services. The reason why Kent Hughes hinted at the fact that he thought that they still have too many defensemen is that Kovacevic is not the only guy in that situation. Justin Barron cannot be sent down to the American League at the end of the upcoming training camp without going through waivers. So being waiver eligible makes him super vulnerable to being lost for nothing. And trust me, he would be picked up by someone. Someone would definitely give him a chance. Jordan Harris is not waiver exempt anymore. Same thing with him. So at some point, it's okay. It's not necessarily about cramming your lineup with the most rookies possible. I get your point about letting Hudson, Reinbacher, Hengstrom, all those guys time to develop in the AHL. But you don't want to lose assets for nothing. And the fact that some of those defensemen are becoming waiver eligible makes it so that the Canadians are against the clock with those guys. So if they could move them prior to the season so that they're not faced in that situation and that they're not forced to maybe hold on to a player just because he's waiver eligible and send another kid down that they think would be probably more deserving, but the numbers game and the contract situation makes it so that he's not going to get his shot at first. They don't want to be put in that situation ideally. So because of that, I expect that they'll try to make at least one more move. They could bundle one or a couple of those guys and just keep the cream at the top. That'd be great. But that's why there's still too many defensemen.
Yeah, and the other note is just like right now in the case of Barron and Harris, if you enter trade talks when they get to the point where they have to go through waivers, you lose a lot of leverage in trade talks because a team will just be like, well, I can just wait for him to get on waivers and then just claim him. So you lose a lot of the heft of your leverage in trade talks. Now, obviously, if you're dealing with better teams, you don't lose as much leverage because what are the chances that the player will get to them in the waiver order? But generally speaking, if you know that you want to avoid a situation where you have a whole bunch of defensemen that all have to get through waivers to go to Laval, because the teams that you're dealing with, you lose a lot of leverage in that situation, just because they can always say, "We'll just wait for him to get on waivers." So,
yeah, but I think what they've probably come across that situation around the draft or since they've been trying to make a move, but these guys just don't have a lot of value right now in the market, especially not Barron. I think that, Harris is proving to be a serviceable defenseman. A team could look at him and say, yeah, he's going to play on my third pair. I'll give you this or that. But they're not probably worth more in the eyes of fans in Montreal, or with in Barron's case, with the memory of him being dealt for Arturi Lehkonen. But the fact of the matter is, guys like that, you can find them rather easily at this point.
Yeah, the one hope for the Canadiens is that a team that doesn't quite get as much as they hope for in free agency, or a team that's defense comes out of free agency looking a little light on depth or a little light on mobility in Harris's case, and even Barron's case, circles back to them and says, okay, let's talk about your guys because we need to fill out our defense. So that's the other thing. Next one comes from Dylan. Dylan asks, why does it seem like Kent Hughes backed off the McGroarty trade after getting Demidov? We still have an abundance of defensemen, picks, and prospects, and could use another top six winger to add to Caulfield, Slaf, and Demidov. Why not still make a trade for him? Well, Dylan, I think I don't know this for a fact, but I would guess that the price on that trade was quite high, that they were willing to give up a lot to get McGroarty if they did not get Demidov, just because they have surplus. So they were willing to give up more assets than they know that. And again, this is me kind of reading between the lines and trying to put some pieces and some dots together. They were probably willing to give up more in assets than they normally would, just because they felt that they really needed to address that need in their organization, and that having Demidov makes that need less. They have less of a need there, so they're less willing to overpay to get that player. Now, does that mean they're not going to get him? I don't think so, and I don't even. It's not, I mean, not necessarily, I should say. Like, yes, they can continue talking about him, and if Winnipeg is desperate to move him, then maybe something can be salvaged there, because clearly there were talks. There were talks between Winnipeg and Montreal for this player. So anytime two teams talk about a player, there's certain benchmarks of the negotiation that are already set. So there's probably been players mentioned. There were probably picks from this year's draft mentioned, although I really strongly don't think it was the number 5 pick, but might have been the number 21 pick for all we know. So certain things have been sort of established, like, oh, I like this a little less. Maybe there's something to work off of there, so we'll see. But honestly, Kent Hughes did not sound like a man who anticipated having a really rock and roll summer. So it would be a little surprising, but until McGroarty gets traded, I would not write off the possibility of the Canadiens doubling back and trying to work something out with Winnipeg, using some of their excess of picks and young defensemen to make it happen.
Yeah, well, the draft serves as a pressure point for that sort of deal, and once that deadline has passed, the potential suitors are not necessarily the same, because certain teams that probably had a lot of draft capital for the 2024 draft, and now they've used it, and maybe their situation is not the same in 2025. And what also, maybe you've heard more than I did about that, but I'm not sure that Kevin Cheveldayoff really came out and stated publicly what he would be looking for in a return for McGroarty.
He's barely acknowledging that McGroarty exists publicly.
Yeah,
he's barely acknowledging that he's actually he's barely acknowledging that he's actively trying to trade him. So
yeah,
you're not getting anything publicly. And to be clear, Ken Hughes did not publicly talk about McGroarty either. Like this is somewhat. Elliot Friedman reported that the Canadiens and the Jets talked about McGroarty in a trade. What Ken Hughes did say was that if Demidov were not available at number 5, there was another trade that they were prepared to make that did not involve the number 5 pick, but would have brought in a forward that would help them.
Yeah,
it's not hard to put 2 and 2 together and figure that those two stories kind of link up. So yeah, Kevin Gildeaf hasn't acknowledged this publicly one bit.
But I mean, there's no real necessity for the Jets to solve that now. McGroarty could go back to college and pout and wait to be traded. And
if he gets to his senior year, he's just going to wait. Like if you make him go back to college for his junior year, McGroarty's going to be like, well, I'll just play my senior year and I'll become a UFA, and that's that. So there is some urgency. Like as soon as he goes back for his junior year of college, you've lost the asset for nothing, basically. So I think that it's more about there's more to it than McGroarty just going and pouting. He has more leverage than the Jets, I think, are willing to admit here, and I think there should be more urgency on their part to get a deal done. So we'll see what happens, because it's not the risk of them losing a 14th overall pick or whatever he was. It was 14th, I think it was. The risk of him losing a 14th overall pick for nothing is a real one. Like it could happen. So
yeah. See, I think but my point about Cheveldayoff is to say it's not clear what they're looking for. So I don't know if the Canadiens at this point, now that the draft has passed, has the sort of stuff that that might entice the Jets, and are they still willing to part with one of their better young defensemen? I'm not sure about that.
Well, I think that's what it would. I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
If you want to really speculate, that's probably what it would have cost. And then once the need was no longer there, then they were like, okay, we're not doing that anymore. So.
Okay. Next question. Okay, in the run-up to the draft, it seems to me all the discourse about the Habs scouting team revolved around Nick Bobroff. I heard little about Martin Lapointe, about what Martin Lapointe might have felt about things or what his philosophy might be. I understood that these two share the director of amateur scouting role, but can you shed some light on the division of labor? Is one of them driving the bus more than the other? Are their responsibilities divided, sort of like Gorton and Hughes? How do they work as a team, and does it make sense to have co-directors when the role is so critical? Well, thank you for your question. I missed the person who actually
Zach.
All right,
there you
go. So yes, Zach Lesak. Thank you. It's an interesting question. I think. Well, first off, I would be tempted to think that Bobroff within the organization has a bit more of a say, just because he was brought in by the vice president of hockey operations, who he had worked with before for a long time. So the prior connection between Bobroff and Gorton is undeniable. Does it mean that they don't value what Martin Lapointe has to say? Of course not. Otherwise, they would not have retained their services. I think that there's a nice complement to each other's work. Also bears mentioning that that Bobroff, when he was with the New York Rangers, was director of European scouting. And so without saying necessarily that that's how the labor is divided in Montreal, because they don't have such titles, I would be inclined to think that Bobroff has a better eye with the European prospects, and Lapointe has a focus more in North America. But both of them obviously are doing their crossover scouts, and they go everywhere. But if I had to say in terms of division, I would think that Barbroff is probably more Europe inclined than Lapointe.
Uh, yeah, yes and no. I think the comparison to Gordon and Hughes is a good one.
But,
I think, well, in the sense that
oh yeah, okay, yeah,
comparing Lapointe and Bobrov to Gordon and Hughes in terms of division of labor, like Lapointe is technically above Bobrov in the, I guess the hierarchy, if you will, but I think they work in tandem a lot. For instance, I know that Bobrov and Lapointe both went to see Reinbracher a lot last year. This year, obviously, Bobrov was the only one to see Demidov. But generally speaking, when they have a pick that high, they're going to see those guys. It's really the other guys where I think what you're saying might be more applicable when you're talking about guys that you're looking at for the third, fourth, fifth rounds.
yeah.
They also have Christer Rockstrom, who is, I think, their head of European scouting. I don't know his exact title, but that's basically what he is. He's been with the organization for a very long time. Hannu Laine, who is responsible for the Kotkaniemi pick, or at least was the main scout that recommended that, is still with the organization and still is pretty high up in terms of scouting. But yeah, in terms of Lapointe and Bobrov, what I think they've done is in the sense that, and why I said it's a good comparison to Gordon and Hughes, is that Gordon and Hughes come from different backgrounds and they have different points of view. And the fact that they're both there, one with a management background and one with an agent background, them combined feel like they will make the best decisions. And so Lapointe coming from a playing background, Bobrov coming from a scouting background, the thought is, and then you have to add Billy Ryan in there. Billy Ryan is someone who has a lot of influence on this group. He's I think director of player evaluation, if I'm not mistaken. He has a title that sounds more important than scout. He's another guy who has a lot of influence on these discussions. And so if I were people, I would just not concern myself with who. We always want to know is like who's pounding the table and who makes the final decision, and the buck has to stop with someone. The Canadians under this administration have taken a very collaborative approach to everything. Front office decisions, scouting decisions, coaching decisions. It's very much a place where, according to multiple people, where people are just free to share their opinions. And so, there's an analytics component to scouting evaluation, and this is a group that listens to the analytics people on prospects. So so I wouldn't worry about it. It's just like these. it's Lapointe and Bobrov are both in charge of it. I think they disagree sometimes, and that's good for the decision-making process. Sometimes they're in full agreement. And I think by the time you get to the draft, generally they are in full agreement. But they'll go through battles where the whole group is arguing. So it's a collaborative effort, but ultimately the buck stops at Hughes and Gordon, and they have to make the final call. But I think everyone gets their say in the matter.
Yeah, and one last thing I'll add to this is, there's starting to be a bit of a rotation or new blood coming in among the group of amateur scouts. In the past couple of years, you had Joey Tenute coming in, Fernando Pisani, former player. You mentioned Billy Ryan.
Former Kent Hughes client.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and Billy Ryan, obviously, director of player evaluation and also amateur scout. So, there's been a bit of a changing of the guard, but at first, it really looked as though it was the same group of scouts plus Nick Bobrov. So if we were looking for hints of change in philosophy, you could not necessarily say, well, their group of scouts is totally different now. There's a complete overhaul. So the change of philosophy will come right from the top and also from the co-directors. So to a certain, and now that Trevor Timmons not there, also Martin Lapointe has a different role just among the the amateur scouting. So the way that he decides to organize things, address things, might be different than what it was under Timmins. So I totally agree with the fact that it's a collaborative effort, but I think that at first, with when Bobrov came in, he symbolized that possible change in the scouting department, because otherwise there was a lot of the same many faces.
Yeah, and this is very much a Gordon Hughes kind of, although some of the longer standing scouts are still there, and really Christopher Rockstrom predates Bergevin, predates a lot of people, so it's it's not there's a mix and match, but yeah, it's there's been some new blood, and Nick Bobrov brings, I think, a fresh perspective to Martin Lapointe's work. But for sure, Martin Lapointe's been elevated since before he worked under Trevor Timmins, and really had more of a crossover, more of a hybrid role when Trevor Timmins was still around. He wasn't solely an amateur guy.
No,
he did a lot of player personnel, pro scouting, stuff like that. So, we'll we see them sitting at the combine together all the time. They'll sit there for hours and not say a word to each other. Yeah, well, I'm only half joking when I say that, but yeah, no, that's, I think, it's, and really in Vegas, like, their unanimity on Demidov was quite striking, because they didn't really get that many questions in Nashville on Reinbacher, because it's always, they speak after the second day, so the stuff about the what happened on the first night sometimes gets overshadowed by all the picks they made in the second, third, fourth, fifth, all these guys that they got.
Plus, it was covered by the GM on the night before.
Exactly. Like, everyone's written their story on the big pick by the time Bobrov and Lapointe talk. I always make a point of asking them about their first pick. But this year it was obviously more of a talking point, because Bobrov actually saw Demidov live. And so during the questions about Demidov, you could just see just how they were equally ecstatic about getting this player, and just as happy as Ken Hughes was the night before. So I'm sure there's many instances where they don't agree, but I think that's the point of the relationship.
Yeah. I'm so, did I say that the other day? I'm so excited that they drafted this kid. So excited.
Well, yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens, but he's a good looking player. He's a really good player, and we'll see how it translates. Like, I'm fascinated to watch Michkov play this year. Honestly, like, I want to see if what I saw in video in Russia translates to the NHL. And Demidov does not play the same way as Michkov, but they do some similar things, and they create offense in some similar ways. They're not completely the same, but they do some offensive things similarly. So I'm very curious to see how Michkov is able to navigate that, playing for John Tortorella in Philadelphia. And
that's
whether that'll give some hints as to whether Demidov's offensive style will translate. And frankly, that's why I hope, for his sake and for the Canadians' sake, that he plays in St. Petersburg, and because that's another test. So, but yeah, all signs indicate this is a pretty special player they just drafted. We'll see how it goes. So this is the end. This is the end of our season of podcasting. We'll be back in the fall, and if something big happens, then we'll be writing about it. But yeah, we won't be talking to you in this format. Thanks so much for listening and watching all year. It was a great year. We loved seeing the reaction. Loved being on YouTube for the first time. Thanks to the SBPN guys for hosting us all year and making this happen. And yeah, you got any final words, Marc-Antoine?
Yeah. Actually, if you want to write us an email at basuandgodin@gmail.com. If you want to share some ideas, impressions, just feedback, sometimes in between two seasons, we might figure out, ask ourselves, are there little tweaks that we might want to do or whatever. Just overall feedback is always welcome. So don't hesitate to write us an email or simply a DM on the Basu Godin Twitter handle, Twitter account. So yeah, we're open to that. It keeps the communication line open, so we like that. So
All right.
anyway, thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you in the fall.
Have a nice summer, everyone.
Basu Godin Notebook.